Judy was boring.
Hello.
Then Judy discovered ChumbaCasino.com.
It's my little escape.
Now Judy's the life of the party.
Oh, baby, mama's bringing home the bacon.
Whoa, take it easy, Judy. The Chumba life is for everybody. So go to ChumbaCasino.com and play over 100 casino-style games. Join today and play for free for your chance to redeem some serious prizes. ChumbaCasino.com. No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Lucky Land Casino, asking people, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
Lucky? In line at the deli, I guess?
Aha, in my dentist's office. More than once, actually.
Do I have to say?
Yes, you do.
In the car before my kids' PTA meeting.
Really?
Yes.
Excuse me, what's the weirdest place you've gotten lucky?
I never win and tell.
Well, there you have it. You can get lucky anywhere, playing at LuckyLandSlots.com. Play for free right now. Are you feeling lucky? No purchase necessary. Void where prohibited by law. 18 plus. Terms and conditions apply. See website for details.
Okay, before we go to Andrew, eyes are glazing over already talking about the Finances portal. I think Andrew's going to sort that out when we start talking about sovereignty, self-leadership, and dealing with disagreement. Everyone's going to perk right up. And if we do a bit of a bust up on the screen, we've got an expert on hand to help. Visual dad joke. Okay, a quickie then from you, Super Slug, this morning. Did I put it on the screen, though? No, I don't think I did. We'll come back to that. And maybe we'll try out the dad jokes this morning on Andrew Bryant, who joins me now. Let's give him a nice big round of applause. Olá, bom dia, Andrew.
Bom dia, tudo bom?
Muito bem, obrigado. Contigo. We could keep going around in that circle, can't we? Do you find yourself in that circle from time to time?
I do. So I'm English by birth, Australian by passport, Singaporean by business, but Brazilian by wife. So
Brazilian by wife, what a fantastic turn of phrase. But a truly international gentleman from, well, you are the Self-Leadership International Organization. And you're here to talk to us about self-leadership, sovereignty, and dealing with disagreement. How did you get into that, Andrew?
It's a long story. How long's your show? Let me give you the abridged version, right? So went to an English grammar school. I was a pretty good science student and thinking about doing medicine. And then they merged my boys' grammar school with the girls' high school just before my A-levels. And I didn't get the grades required to get into medical school.
Why is that?
I know. I did. I mean, I'll leave it to your audience to consider what distracted me. But I made it into physiotherapy as a second option. Graduated in 1982 and did a couple of years working in hospitals. And then I did what most male physiotherapists do. I started working in sport. I worked with a first division soccer team. I worked with a ballet company, Olympic athletes. And that got me interested in not just the physical, but the psychological side of things. And then I moved to Australia in the mid to late 80s and set up my chain of physiotherapy clinics. By this time I had a postgraduate in acupuncture, again started working with sport. Awesome. And I helped a sports team win that was sponsored by a managing director of a company. And as we know, Australians are sports mad. And he said, look, you helped my sports team win. Now come work with my management team because they suck. And
what a brilliant offer, though. And good thinking on his part, right? That the skills might be transferable.
Yeah, I mean, this is so interesting because in the 80s was before positive psychology was invented or at least named, and it's before sports psychology became a field of expertise. But there was the recognition that there is this transference of, setting an objective, working together as a team, et cetera, et cetera. But the fortunate thing about having done physiotherapy is it's a very good discipline for modeling. You get very good at observing behavior. So If somebody has an injury, you watch how they run or they walk or they throw, and then you extrapolate back. When he asked me to come look at his management team, I hadn't at that time done an MBA. I didn't have a consultant's mindset. So I went with a blank sheet of paper, a tabula rasa, if you will, and I observed how they worked, interacted. And I was able to then model what was working and what was not. And that was what entered me into the field of self-leadership, because I realized you can't lead anybody else unless you first lead yourself.
Yes.
I had some imposter syndrome. I thought, well, I'm a physiotherapist. What am I doing, as a leadership consultant? So I went off to do an MBA to legitimize, and I ended up getting into conflict with my lecturers and saying, well, yeah, the theory you're teaching is really interesting, but it doesn't work in practice. And I had a great professor who said, Andrew, you've got some good ideas. Why don't you go and do your own research and write your own book? And the rest, as they say, is history.
Is that how academics deal with that sort of challenge? Because they must hear it, right? And that is the great, I suppose, conundrum, isn't it? The idea that if you do, you do. If you don't, you teach, or something along those lines.
Those that can do, those that can't teach or sit on committees, I think
exactly. And those who challenge those people are invited to go and do some research and write a book, which you clearly did. Which is a great outcome there. Before we go any further into the self-leadership and sovereignty and dealing with disagreement and the personal development stuff, you are also in Portugal. Loving life here in Portugal. And how did you get to be here?
Well, I love it, but I need to give you some credit, Carl, because my wife and I looked at Portugal in the midst of the pandemic. Our eldest daughter got a place to do vet science in the UK. And my wife wanted to move closer. Singapore's a long way from the UK. We both had enough of Singapore. We'd been there 17 plus years. And she said, well, where do we move to? And I said, well, I don't want to go back to England. And she said, what about Portugal? And I had never visited Portugal. I had some positive impressions, but I'd never been here. My wife had been here a couple of times. Clearly, of course, being Brazilian, she speaks the language.
Yeah.
So, we went online, started doing our research, and I started watching your show from Singapore. I sent you a few messages from Singapore.
Yes.
So kudos to you and your show for making me feel that this was not as much of a risk as I thought it might be.
Yeah.
We went online. We saw a house, or rather my wife found a house that she'd fell in love with. We had some friends here. We sent them to the house with a video camera. We bought a house sight unseen, as it were. And that was in 2020, and we moved here in 2021.
Fantastic. What a brilliant story. And which part of Portugal did you choose?
So we are in a little village called Magoito, which is part of the São João das Lampas, which is just north of Sintra.
Oh, beautiful. Fantastic. Well, I'm so glad to hear. That's a lovely backstory. So back to the self-leadership, the sovereignty. And it's good timing, isn't it, ahead of this coronation that's coming up? I guess we're looking at the monarch within here. I'm apparently medway by wife, using your earlier turn of phrase, which doesn't sound quite as exciting as being Brazilian by wife. And that's Mrs. M who's talking there as Feel Good Astrology. She also went to one of those mixed grammar schools, but was one of the girls that was integrated in rather than one of the lads who was already there. A couple of years after girls were added, trust me, it sucked for us too, with predominantly male teachers, male subjects, and zero empathy. Yes, she needed some dealing with disagreement skills back in those days, by the sound of it. So yes, perhaps we could begin then. And this does go back to I think you caught the tail end of why it is and how it is people get triggered. And then we had a bit of a conversation, didn't we, via Messenger? And it was a delight to hear that you were something of an expert on this, and that you could furnish my probably quite poorly thought out and executed theories on the matter, and how this connects in this age of the triggering and disagreement, and how social media, it would seem, is a great accelerator and catalyst for all of these problems. And the coronation, as I say. Let's break down each of those, if we may. I mean, dealing with disagreement is fairly straightforward, but what you mean by self-leadership and sovereignty?
Well, firstly, you gave me the title, so I'm going to run with it, and it's a great title. So in my 2012 book, which I co-authored with Dr. Anna Kazan, which is called Self-Leadership, How to Become a More Successful, Efficient, and Effective Leader from the Inside Out, we coined a definition which, if you Google self-leadership, you're most likely to find. And that is that self-leadership is a practice of intentionally influencing your thinking, feeling, and actions toward your objectives. So let me firstly break that down. It is an intention to own our thoughts and feelings. And we've all had the experience of our thoughts and feelings owning us when we get into a circular inner narrative, and which could be a downward spiral or an upward spiral, or emotions can overwhelm us. But if we are leading self-autonomy, we are intentional about moving ourselves towards an objective. So we have in mind a future self. I'm moving towards a better version of myself, or a more fulfilled version of myself. And that's very important in today, because over the last 5-10 years, psychologists have come to the conclusion that we have no free will, that we are a result of the algorithm of our DNA and our early childhood upbringing, and that when we think we are making autonomous decisions, they're actually pre-programmed. But from a self-leadership perspective, the moment we are intentional, the moment I chose to be on your show, or the moment I agreed to your invitation, I have changed my future as long as I made that decision intentionally.
Yes.
And this is the crux, and this is why I picked up on the triggering, is often we are triggered by things that we are not aware of that is an intention, and that we are framed from birth. In my keynote speeches, I do a piece where I talk about, do you remember the moment of your birth? Of course we don't, we're unconscious to that. But within the moment that we are born into the world by a midwife or a doctor, after being carried by our mother for 9 months, within moments of that, we're given a name, a nationality, an ethnicity, a gender, and possibly a religion and football team to follow. We've been framed.
And in Portugal, a NIF number.
Yes, and absolutely a NIF number. And, it's this. Yes. It's the same in the US with a tax identity number. And so, how we are triggered is often a threat to that identity, which is one that we didn't choose. It was an accident.
Yes.
Right. Nationality is an accident of birth.
Yeah, absolutely.
Economic status in our early part of our years is certainly an accident of birth. And so we accept those frames as true, and we can be triggered when somebody invades our personal space. Right.
Yeah,
now, physical personal space, the British are very big on, right? They put their towel on the beach anywhere in the world, and they've conquered that bit of the beach for England, right? And woe betide a German that moves that towel off a lounger around the pool, because that is a triggering behavior. It is an invasion of personal space. But what people don't realize is that our mental landscape, anybody who says something that doesn't agree with our worldview, they can be triggered by.
Yeah, absolutely. And do you think it's not really a new thing, is it? It's just that we've found more efficient ways of triggering each other.
Well, I think that, there's more nuance to how we're triggered, right? I mean, human beings are tribal creatures, right back from our earliest history. And we survived by a tribe of family members. So the familiarity was there. So anybody that was outside of the tribe was a potential threat. And our brain is hardwired to see difference as a threat. Now that we live in this global environment where diversity is more obvious to us, then I guess we have more choices by things or lack of choice, more automatic things to be triggered by.
Yeah, absolutely. That does seem to be the context, doesn't it? So I love it. Self-leadership, to begin with, we are perhaps moving it between sort of paradigms here. A few decades, certainly centuries ago, we might have had the emphasis on being led. Again, that's why I think it's so interesting that we've got a coronation coming up, and how that is different to how King Charles's mother, at the age that she was crowned, there would have been an entirely different paradigm or thought process around the idea of being led, being a subject. And we're a little bit different now, it would seem. And as you say, it's about intention. It comes from within. We're not necessarily being led by parent, teacher, or boss anymore. We live in a world where it's much more possible to generate our own picture of ourselves and our future and how we want to be and how we intend that to be. How does sovereignty come into that? Is that the ownership of those things?
It is. So we're doing this show in the context of an upcoming coronation. And so sovereignty, of course, is a buzzword at the moment. Sovereignty, as you know, means absolute authority. And I, as a self-leadership author, coach, speaker, believe that we have that authority over self, that we should take ultimate responsibility for our thoughts, feelings, and actions. And I think that we don't live, no man is an island, and therefore there are consequences to the choices we make about that in terms of our accountability to the environment that we're in. Right? Now, the United Kingdom having this coronation, as you say, it's a paradigm shift. We give people authority over us if there's, unconsciously, if there's a benefit, right? So we elect a leader of the tribe, or we support the leader of the tribe because it's a net benefit to us that leader defends us against threat. Yeah. And when Charles's mother was crowned, you're coming out of the Second World War, where you've had a loyalty to the king against a national threat. Realizing nationality is one of those massively strong frames that people will defend to the death, without really understanding what it means, and because it's an accident of birth. But now with travel, you and I live in a different country. I left home at 18. I left England at 25. In fact, I took on a new nationality. I became an Australian citizen. I mean, ironically, I had to swear allegiance to the Queen to become an Australian citizen. I didn't escape it totally, did I? But then I moved to Asia. And so I've lived in multiple contexts. And the reason I say Brazilian by wife is marrying a Brazilian is a completely different cultural context. Yeah. We British are very linear in our thinking and our actions, and the Brazilians are multilinear. Many things are happening simultaneously, and they're comfortable with that. So I had to examine the frames that drove my behavior and choose, do I want them or not? Do I want to accept that, or do I want to accept what my Brazilian wife brought to the party? Yeah. And this is what the British people are going through right now. When Elizabeth was crowned, the British people, there was no discussion. There was no choice. Do we give up with the monarchy now? No, it was obvious. We needed a head of state to defend us against foreign threat. Now it's a very different world. Do we want to give power to a hereditary monarch? And with social media and media in general, we now know that they are not perfect in any way, shape, or form. The family has some wonderful dysfunctions that we've all witnessed. Yes. And now it seems, well, do I really need to give away some level of autonomy and authority to this power? What am I going to get back in return? And so it's a legitimate discussion.
Yeah, it really is. It really is at the moment. And you can imagine, can't you, Charles walking the corridors of monarchic power, looking at a portrait of his mum and saying, "Mummy, it was so much easier in your day." He has an entirely different plate in front of him, doesn't he? On which he is about to feast one way or another.
Oh, well, I love the eating metaphor. I don't know whether it was easier for her. I mean, well, it's certainly not easy for him, because if we're talking about self-leadership, they are born into a context that was very difficult to escape from, right? Elizabeth did not want to be queen, and Charles may have wanted to be king, but his level of autonomy, his bride was picked for him by Earl Mountbatten, and that didn't turn out so well, did it? And he doesn't have a choice about this. And the consequences of being born into a very strong context are huge. I mean, Harry chooses to leave the family, right? Maybe that was an act of autonomy, but it certainly looks like he gave up one strong power structure for another power structure, which is, Meghan.
I know what you're getting at there. Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Okay. So let's bring this back to us. and the role that self-leadership, sovereignty might play in our lives, and then how that feeds into dealing with disagreement, which is what I guess is the genesis of this conversation, is how we might be happier, basically, existing in the world, and in a world where there appear to be these threats of people having different ideas to us being in a different culture, for example. And let me, before I ask the next question based on that, let me just come to a few comments which I which I think will set a context for that. Sport and business are great partners. This is going back to what you were saying about your beginnings as a physiotherapist and then going into the corporate world. Pete says, I was lucky enough to teach with Matthew Pinson and Steve Redgrave, and their visualization and attitude permeated the students, resulting in a lot of rowing golds and silvers at the Olympics from his ex-students. As a proud moment there. And then with the matter here of dealing with disagreement and being triggered, if we're wired to be triggered by differences, as I think you were alluding to, what can migrants do to feel empowered in their new country? So a sort of double-headed question here is, generally speaking, as human beings, we perhaps live in a more charged environment where our sense of sovereignty can be challenged, undermined. Our sense of self-leadership might be called to the fore. So we've got that in social media, in the political world, in a very excitable and emotional world, it would seem, that's driven by social media in this context. And we've also got the expat thing of being in a new country. It comes back to self-leadership, doesn't it? And how to stand in your sovereignty. Can you give us a free bit of coaching then on this? How to do that? How can we come into our sovereignty? So, I mean, the ultimate intention being that we are happy either on social media or here in Portugal, for example.
So I call this the me, not me boundary, right? So what is me? What is my sovereignty? Using the metaphor of the towel on the beach, right? I've conquered this bit of space. So me obviously is my physical body, but a sense of me actually extends beyond that. We know that if somebody gets too close to us, we feel space invaded, right? And there's a gender perspective to this. I'm on the faculty of women in leadership at a couple of universities, and women absolutely are sensitive to space invasion. So me is my space, and that may extend beyond my physical body. Some cultures need a lot of space, some not so much. And so then there's my thoughts and taking ownership. This is my thought. Is this my thought? Or is this a thought I've inherited from my parents, my schooling, my culture? My mum would say, eat all the food on your plate, right? And so is that my thought? Or is that now if I'm full, I will leave a bit on my plate. But then I'm in a cultural war with my wife who says, you put it on your plate, you have to eat it, right? So, but my thought is, I'm only going to put in enough into my system that I need. That's now my thought. I own it. Now, may I adapt my behavior depending on context? Yes, I will. My feelings. This is my feeling. What do I feel right now? And human beings adults particularly, are emotionally illiterate. If you ask somebody, how do you feel? Oh, okay. When could you go a bit deeper? Well, I'm fine. But what does that mean? Are you angry? Are you frustrated? Are you excited? Are you curious? And we cannot effectively communicate, particularly, and we talked offline about nonviolent communication. If you don't know how something makes you feel, you can't own it. But the important thing about this ownership and the me, not me boundary is, if something happens, if somebody cuts in front of me in traffic. Now, of course, I think you were talking about Portuguese drivers before I got on. The first time somebody came across 3 lanes of traffic in front of me, my response was anger, frustration, fear, and probably I came up with some expletives. But those are my feelings. Did that driver make me feel those things? No. He doesn't know who I am, or she doesn't know who I am. I know who I am. Those are my feelings in response to that situation.
Wonderful.
So then I take action. Whatever I do, I hit my horn or I drive carefully and avoid that individual. We must take ownership of our actions. If a child says, he made me do it, how are we going to respond to that child? Right?
Yeah,
I remember
amazing.
Yeah. Well, I remember when my son was young and playing rugby, and there was a mother yelling at her son. She said, if your friends jumped off a bridge, would you jump too? And her son said, duh, yeah. Right.
Not the answer
because, I just thought that was so profound. He understood that he was going to fit in with the tribe.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, as expats that intentionally have moved countries, we have chosen the behavior, the action, and therefore we must take consequence. If you're a refugee and it wasn't of your ownership, you had no choice but to leave your country or be killed, then that's different. Now, the beauty of taking this me, not me, is that we can then see those things that we're reacting to as external to that invisible bubble, right? What he or she said is what he or she said. It's not about me. It's what they said based on their worldview or mental model, right? I can choose or choose not to react to that.
Wonderful.
And that's the sovereignty. Right
and that is me, not me. Is that how you described it?
Yeah. So looking at the situation, what in this situation is me?
Yeah.
And what in the situation is not me?
Wonderful. Okay, I want to just to take you back a little bit there. And sorry, the lip sync's gone. That makes the interview a little bit more difficult. But I should say, adults are emotionally illiterate. This is part of the problem, isn't it? Is that what you said? I mean, or what
I did. I inferred it. A lot of adults. I mean, I remember when my kids were coming home from primary school and they had these little, these little happy faces. This is happiness. This is sadness. And so the kids were being taught to identify, to be self-aware. What are they feeling?
Yeah.
Very few people. How you doing? Okay. Like that. I mean, the comedians say, the best you can get out of a British person is, all right under the circumstances. Right.
Yeah,
whereas the Americans.
Yeah.
Yeah. Considering, well, I'm awesome. I'm amazing. How are we really, the authenticity to say, well, look, I'm excited. These things in my life are going really well. I've got a challenge right now, but I'm working through it. Right. Yeah.
And this is what's so fascinating to me. And that's why I wanted to sort of double check in on that, is because on the surface, you might say I'm fine, or I'm really good considering, or I'm awesome as a kind of programmed and habitual response. And then you go onto social media or something happens and you actually find out how you really are that day, don't you? Or how you are in relation to the thing that happened to you. So is the training here, is the coaching to go through that process, to actually really train and learn about how you are truly, honestly feeling. And as a first thing, and then second thing, to see what is yours and not yours in any given interaction. And I think generally speaking, we're not very good at that, are we?
No. And we're conditioned to decide how we are. And you absolutely nailed it there, which is by comparison. And social media says. So I might get up and I might think, oh, I'm feeling okay, and then I turn on social media and one of my colleagues has just landed a keynote speech in some amazing venue. And now I've got comparison and go, well, I didn't get an invite to speak at that conference. I'm not being flown first class to stay at that resort. And so now I'm feeling not okay. And that's comparison. The Buddha said, comparison is the seat of all unhappiness.
Yeah,
which is interesting because I recently did speak at one of those conferences in Finland, and I was flown business class to Helsinki, and I did speak there. And while I was there, Helsinki, Finland as a country got voted happiest country in the world for the 6th year in a row. And I'm like, really? Because you talk to the Finnish, and they're as surprised as anybody, right? Because they're thinking, am I the only Finn that's actually not happy? They have 11 months of winter, 1 month of summer. Why are they happy?
Yeah.
And so I looked at some of the research behind this. Firstly, it is self-recorded. How do you feel? So they have a very low expectation of happiness, right? Mm. As long as they can go out in nature, and they do that. They spend their summer holiday in nature, and they have a social contract, right? It's a fairly it's a fairly homogenous society. Finns are half Swedish, half Estonian ethnically, but their social contract is there. If you drop your wallet in Helsinki, there's a 9 out of 10 chance it's going to come back to you because they still have that sense of community. And that's very important to happiness. But the most important thing, I mean, if you compare the Finns with the Swedes, which is just across a body of water, and I speak in Sweden a lot, there's no comparison in Finland. They don't care what you think about them, right? So they've really got the me, not me boundary down. They're like, well, okay, so you've got a bigger car, so what? I'm happy with my car, right? So they don't do the comparison. And if we could do a little bit more of that, we'd be a lot happier.
Amazing. Okay, well, we've come up to the end. I hope you'll come back because I've had a lovely time talking to you, and I'm sure others have enjoyed this conversation as well. And I hope you'll come back and be something of a regular in this community. If we can sort of have a little bit of a takeaway here, we like to think of ourselves as the open-minded, open-hearted phone-in. And part of that isn't about expecting or comparing, isn't it? Which are sort of key takeaways here, not comparing ourselves to others necessarily, not expecting a certain kind of outcome, but setting intentions more, perhaps, leading ourselves rather than being led, understanding the sovereign nature, not just as a right, perhaps, but also as a responsibility, because it needs to be exercised, doesn't it? The sovereignty, it comes with responsibilities to own it. So, sorry, go on. You're going to add something to that.
No, I think it's a great summary. I mean, there is no responsibility without accountability. Yeah. Right. And those are two separate things. People use the words interchangeably. In 2 of my books, I have really pushed hard at separating. I'm responsible for me, but I'm accountable to whatever, I'm accountable to my marriage. I'm accountable to you to turn up to this show and do a good job. Right. Yeah. Because I said I would. And so it frustrates me when people don't turn up on time because they said they were going to. For me, that was a contract.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Okay. So thank you so much. I think that has enriched our community and the way we roll here. And I hope we're a prototype based on these sorts of values and the things you've shared with us, Andrew, for a different kind of phone-in for the future. I just think the old, what do they call it? The legacy or heritage media that seem to be promoting and is based on old values that aren't enriching or helping us develop as human beings.
I agree, and I salute what you're doing, and you're incisive in terms of your ability to pick up on the points. We see mainstream media, and even I tend to watch a lot of American news because I have business there. People asking yes or no questions, right? And this, the logical fallacies that occur on cable news media, right? The straw man arguments, the whataboutism, the false dichotomies. Having an understanding that people can have different perspectives and still have something in common. And if we were to talk about conflict, we would be looking at finding that thing in common. Red team supporters hate blue team supporters and vice versa, but they both agree that they love football.
Yeah, well said. And I think that's a nice sort of motif to end on there. And I hope you will come back. You have a key to the studio, basically. Do please come back. And I'd want to unpack this more. Perhaps you're a little. I was too adventurous in wanting to squeeze self-leadership, sovereignty, and dealing with disagreement all into 1.5 hour session. So do please come back. Have a great day, and thank you for sharing your ideas and yourself with us this morning.
Obrigado. Até a próxima.
Nice, very good, and a nice big round of applause for you, sir. Thank you very much, Andrew. Take care, everybody. Yay!
Wells Fargo presents one of the surest ways to grow your money. A Wells Fargo CD account, where you can earn a 5.00% annual percentage yield on an 11-month term with a minimum opening deposit of $5,000. Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/CD rates to open a CD account and start growing your savings with us.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.
Hello, saver. Whether you're saving for that trip to the tropics or saving for an emergency, now is the time to take advantage of Wells Fargo's savings options. Wells Fargo offers savings accounts that can help you save towards your goals. So, what are you saving for? Visit a Wells Fargo branch or wellsfargo.com/save to open a savings account today.
Wells Fargo Bank, N.A., member FDIC.